But yes, for those who don't know, a couple weeks or a month ago, I had a whole segment where I broke down everything I know about James Lindsay and why he's a piece of shit. And it was funny. And then we watched his PragerU because at that time James Lindsay had just released a PragerU video, and it was so surface level it made no sense. But we discussed it. James Lindsay is someone who, with Peter Boghossian, did this like paper that was like it was called Conceptual Penis, and it was supposed to be a hoax that like made gender studies look silly. It didn't, in fact, succeed at that, but they have constantly tried to keep pushing this line. And I guess they just released a pamphlet that's called Responding to Social Justice Rhetoric, and it's a cheat sheet of some kind. And Marc Lamont Hill, who used to be on CNN but was kicked off for saying things in support of Palestine, now has his own show for like the Black News Network or something like this, and has them on to sort of debate them, kind of. So we'll get into that, I guess. And we'll see where it goes. I haven't watched this full clip, so this is going to be a journey for everyone here. I have watched the end when it gets kind of really silly and James looks silly. So let it be known that it ends positively. But we will get there.
Welcome back to Black News Tonight. Republicans have been on the offensive against concepts like critical race theory and white privilege, concepts that they believe attack fundamental American values, patriotism, and ultimately against freedom of speech and expression. In fact, there's a new cheat sheet making its rounds in conservative circles.
Why?
Fortunately, we at BNC got our hands on it. It was made by a trio of authors from the Oregon Association of Scholars. It was recently published, and it was made for policymakers, and it was entitled Responding to Social Justice Rhetoric. It identifies 12 social justice terms and describes...
When they say equity, and then I guess it shows you what they really mean, social justice, what they mean is group entitlements. Dear Lord.
That sounds right.
Racial justice, what they mean is racial favoritism. Holy shit. BIPOC folks, what they mean is non-European something.
Oh, I want decolonization, environmental justice. There's no capitalism on this one.
White privilege / supremacy. What they mean is European moral culpability.
Huh? Aren't you morally culpable? Like,
or what they're
saying. That's not what it means. But like, aren't white people morally culpable?
Yeah.
Are you not?
No, the white people.
Like you personally aren't, but like, but you are.
White people.
You know what I mean? Yeah, like you personally, you didn't do anything. You're fine. But y'all, oh man, y'all. Oh.
What a
really do need a plural you word
again,
in English.
I've been refraining from using the word stupid, but I have no other word to describe this fucking sheet. This is it. All right.
12 social justice terms and describes their, quote, intended and true meanings as understood by the authors, of course. So, for example, when they say systemic racism, this is their words, what they mean is differences are always due to systems, which is an attribution of group differences to vague, quote unquote, systems imposed by others and an attempt to dismantle freedoms and forcibly redistribute public and private goods. That's a heck of a interpretation. And that's why we're very excited to have our guests on who will talk about why they believe social justice rhetoric curtails freedom of speech and diversity of thought. I have with me now, 2 of the 3 authors of the cheat sheet, Doctors Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. Thank you both for joining me. Let's just get right to it. How does social justice rhetoric curtail freedom of speech?
Well, the rhetoric around social justice itself doesn't necessarily curtail anything, but the application of that rhetoric is very chilling. It leads people to believe that they're going to be accused of participating in, supporting, or being complicit in racism, sexism, misogyny, etc., for voicing views that differ from the views of the people who forward what is known as critical social justice specifically, which is just one of many approaches to social justice in the understanding of making things more fair and less discriminatory and prejudiced in society.
What's wrong?
Why does he look like he's about to fucking cry? Why does he look like he's about to fucking just like start just pissing his pants at any fucking moment? James, what are you doing? You're not representing us here, buddy. Come on.
He's a child.
How
Go for it, Vito.
How is his mic so bad?
I don't know. I was just thinking that. Like,
I mean,
this
he's got
man,
a big poofy thing covering it. It should be
he might have like just like a very shitty Amazon mic. And he's got the little poof thing because he doesn't know what he's doing. Or maybe he's got the mic from his like earphones on and he doesn't realize it. I could totally see that being the thing.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I was like getting to the content of what he said there, which like I don't know, maybe don't say racist stuff and you won't be called out for it.
You're right. I love the answer of just like, how does it curtail freedom of speech? Oh, well, it doesn't, but sometimes people said that I'm being a misogynist. Like, yeah, because you are, because that's what you were doing. Like, you were saying things that were racist and sexist, and then people told you that. That's all you just said. You just admitted it. You used big words to admit it, but you admitted it, didn't you? Well, you piece of shit.
As the like demographic that he's often referred to as the people being afraid of like the social justice, which is usually white men. I don't have the same fears because I don't often go around just saying racist and misogynistic shit. And so I'm not worried about people getting mad at me for those things. I wonder
also,
why.
What the fuck is critical social justice?
That's like...
he just created that. That's not...
No, I think that's his whole thing, is just meshing these words together. I mean, like, he was going along with the postmodern neo-Marxist line before, wasn't he? Or was that just Peterson?
Well, no, that's a thing, though. Critical postmodern social justice. That's a thing.
Neo-Marxist. Marxism.
Yeah.
Just, like, I mean,
Karl Marx
probably... you could
Karl
probably...
Marx white people eat shit. Karl Marx, 2012.
I mean, it almost... I mean, critical race theory makes sense because you're being critical about, like, discussions of... or how race is a factor in these things, stuff like this. But critical social justice, I mean, like, it almost sounds like you're being critical of the act of social justice, but usually, like, social justice can be an act of, like, criticism. But it's like they really like that word critical and then just, like, stick it onto everything to be like, oh, if it's critical, it's therefore Marxist, and so therefore bad. Something.
Critical tax returns, please.
Yeah. Because Marx, he was, like, critical of capitalism, and it just all, like, fell apart right there. You were going to say something, Vino?
Oh, I was just saying no critical tax return. Yeah. No critical taxes.
Can you give me an example of that, of something that curbs freedom of speech?
Yeah, sure. Like, for example, we're not allowed to call the thing we plug into our computer anymore a master drive, or we're not allowed to talk about a master bedroom or a master bathroom because it can sometimes make some people feel as though that those words are somehow connected to slavery, even though that's not the case. And so some people can then say, well, that word makes me feel uncomfortable, and then I don't want to have that at work. So you see major corporations, for example, deciding, well, we're not going to use the terms like master slave drive or master bedroom being struck down from realtor websites, for example. And if you don't know, by the way, the master bedroom term originated in a Sears catalog in 1929, which is quite a long time after slavery ended. So it wasn't actually connected to...
I just want to pause here. You know where we heard this talking point before? David fucking Menzies.
Yeah, it was Menzies, wasn't it? Fuck.
And he brought up the real estate thing, which was a Toronto company, which was David Menzies. Unless it's happened like elsewhere.
Yeah. I think it's happened. I do think it's happened elsewhere, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's where James got it. Let's be real.
I can't believe it.
James's research isn't the best.
I was pausing because I was like, was this from his ProgReview video? This feels so familiar. And then I was like, oh yeah, we played the clip from David Menzies. I remember this now.
Yeah.
Oh my god. What a joke. And again, like why does it matter? I mean, like we this is a common talking point, but I think it's going to be constantly a common talking point so long as the right wing exists like this, which is like they're just like new word bad. New word not old word. An old word good. New word bad. And like that's not an argument.
Really I like that I did that once and now it's just our go-to for these
That's what it
fucking
is, right?
people. No new word. New word bad. No new word. Old word. Old word good. Old word work. Old word good.
Because that's their argument all the time. It's like, but it's like, who cares? Who really, like, if we call it master or if we call it something else? At the end of the day, does it matter? No. Because we just called it something else now. Cool. Like, I don't understand why they think this is such a problem.
That turns out to be a legend and not even real. But you can see how being accused of racism is leading even significant corporations to back off from using that language. So the curtailing of the willingness to speak is certainly present within that ideology.
So let me push back against that, and Peter, I want you to jump in as well. I mean, it doesn't sound to me as if this.
I love the call. Here, you got anything you want to say? You ready? You want to jump in here?
Yeah, I feel like Peter just sits here through most of this, but like, I also feel as well that, like, kudos to Marc Lamont Hill, because you can tell it's like hard to sort of like take what Lindsay is saying and actually deal with it, but he does a pretty decent job at it. So kudos to Marc Lamont Hill for being able to do it
For keeping a straight face.
Yeah, exactly.
Is curbing free speech is simply imposing consequences on free speech, and there have always been consequences on free speech. If I, for example, continue to say a master-slave relationship with disk drives, right, which we all used to do, at least back in the day when we actually had disk drives, and make someone uneasy, they may respond differently. If I continue to sell my bedroom furniture as master bedroom furniture, and people say, well, it makes us uneasy, and so we don't want to sell it here. These are market-based consequences, but people have a right to still do it. It seems to me that sometimes the right conflates two things. They take consequences and accountability and they conflate it with freedom. They act as if because people respond to their words or respond to their actions in particular ways, that they're no longer free to do it.
Okay, so
I know there's like a delay, but like the part of me is just like feels like they were stumped. But there's a delay.
Principles. There is the philosophical principle of free speech, and then there is the legal principle of free speech. And so you're appealing to the legal principle, which is of course upheld, except that
I hate this legal.
The problem becomes that the philosophical notion of free speech, the idea that somebody's going to be able to speak without consequences is of course ridiculous. But the idea that somebody's going to be able to speak without having to risk losing their job or losing their standing in society for something that is actually fairly benign, for example, brown bag lunch. It's a completely benign thing, or a thing that nobody even seems to know has a not even really racist connotation in its past from over 100 years ago, long time no see, which is direct translation from the Chinese. The idea that we're going to chill the way that people speak and that they can then lead to situations in which they're being mobbed on social media and losing their livelihood because they don't necessarily have free speech under their employer. That's a really concerning development in society. And it's one.
So, brown bag lunch? What's the issue with brown bag lunch? Is there an issue with brown? I almost want to Google that.
I ended up Googling colorist discriminatory practice against African American community in the 20th century, where blacks with visible Eurocentric features, specifically skin tone equal to or lighter than the color of a brown paper bag, were allowed privileges unavailable to darker skinned blacks. So yeah, basically, if you were as black as a brown bag, then you were seen as better. But that's not like
I mean,
That's such a weird thing to focus on because, like, the proximity, like, closer proximity to whiteness has always been seen in our society, at least, as like a better thing. Like, it's treated that way implicitly. So the idea that, like, oh, it just came around as like the brown paper bag test. Now people are saying brown paper bags are racist. That's not true at all. Like, it's really just an allegory for how we've treated proximities of blackness and whiteness.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
I
agree with that.
but even
I'm
then,
just like,
who's being canceled over this?
yeah.
I don't know, but I'm gonna start canceling some brown bag lunches. I fucking hate that
Yo,
shit. I don't want
no,
to bring my own lunch.
next brown bag lunch at your university. Just cancel everyone in the department. See how it goes.
How dare you? How dare you?
What the fuck is a
I
brown
wish
Oh,
I wish a motherfucker would invite me to brown bag lunch.
So at least this was common at my university, was we would have brown bag lunches, and that would be like someone would present some sort of like paper they're working on, and everyone would eat their lunch in the same room as we watched the thing. It was called like a brown bag talk, because it was like you bring your lunch to the talk.
I've never heard of that in my fucking life. I thought he was literally just saying like the bags existing
Yeah.
was the issue.
No, well, here's the thing: is my guess is he comes from an academic context, right? Like Lindsay has a PhD in mathematics or some shit, and my guess is they could have done like brown bag talks as well. And so, like, I imagine that like there could have been someone who brought up the context that you raised, Elron, and like said that maybe we could call it something else because like it bothers me or something. But then again, call it something else. And then it's like also it's like who like you notice as well. There's no examples here. There's this like vague hand motion towards someone losing their job. And usually whenever they actually give specifics and you look into the case, there's always something more. Always.
Oh,
It's usually never it's usually never just like the one thing that was uttered that got them canceled. It's usually a whole history of harassment and other issues that led up to the final straw.
Yeah, I mean, like, if I told you, right, one time, like, I don't think it's fair that someone got arrested just for speaking their mind against some protesters. You know what I mean? I don't think that's fair. That sounds very innocent and benign. But then if I tell you it's the same guy who back in like 2013 fucking started making monkey noises at a black guy and was caught on camera, that's a little fucking different, isn't it? It's a little bit different once you dig into it.
Yeah. And it always is that. I mean, they did that even with like Brett Weinstein, where it's like everyone like noticed the like him making a statement against the thing that was happening at Evergreen College, which was like some students left the campus to go to some sort of like social justice event and whatnot, right? And everyone framed this as like this poor professor was like, because he refused to like tell people to leave the school in accordance with this activity, even though it was voluntary, that therefore like he was like mobbed and canceled. Meanwhile, he never got canceled. He left and quit on his own accord. But then when you looked into it, he also had a history of like harassing other professors of a different race than he is. And like, you know, like there was like way more to this than just this one occasion, right? It became a huge news story once the one occasion like broke. But there was a whole history of shit that he did that led up to that point, right? It's silly. And like again, I would love examples. Show me the example where someone was like, "Oh, can I see the master bedroom of furniture?" And then someone came from out of nowhere and was like, "What's your job? Fired!" Never happened. It'd be amazing if that happened, but it doesn't happen.
One that we actually should be taking
Aren't they
seriously.
just called
especially
lunch
for having
talks? Why the
extreme-
fuck are they called brown bag whatever?
Because you bring a brown
still
bag
caught up
to
on
your
that,
lunch.
like-
I don't know.
Who the fuck brings a brown bag?
It's like
It's 2021.
It's an old school thing.
It's an
you know,
old-
it's
yeah.
an old school thing.
Listen, I wasn't the
Execute
one.
them.
Yeah.
Execute them all.
I mean, if we want to rejuvenate academia and just destroy all the structures, sure. But I mean, I think having a brown bag talk is one of the least offensive things going on at a university right
Yeah.
now. But but like, yeah, for them, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, and I'm over it.
Some stand downs, for example, in the U.S. military, and we're seeing this kind of stuff taught in schools, which is being done by the state.
And one of the, if I may, Mark, piggyback off of that.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the reasons that we made this, and I genuinely thank you for reaching out to us, is to make ease of translation. And so the first author, I wish he could be here with us tonight, is Bruce Gilley. And a very quick correction from the beginning of the segment. I am not a member of the Oregon Association of Scholars, neither is Dr. Lindsay, it's just Dr. Gilley. One of the reasons that we made this cheat sheet was for policymakers, so when they heard a certain term...
Just Dr. Lindsay and insisting on.
Yeah. Well, he's got that math PhD. I think the thing, too, is like, they're not... Remember, he can't do research anymore. At least research on human subjects. Because of his stupid hoax papers. But at least I guess Lindsay is a professor, but he was a teaching professor, I think. He doesn't have a research position in philosophy. So, and he's, I mean, I don't know. I can't, as someone who studied philosophy, I don't know what the fuck he did. I knew him as an atheist person. Which again, James Lindsay, atheist, and here they are being racist.
Yep.
I think Lindsay is a prof somewhere. No, he's not. He is this. This is his career. What we're viewing here. This is what he makes money on. It's a grift. He goes around doing this shit.
They could translate it into another term in their head so they could understand what people are actually saying, given that the meanings of these words have changed significantly.
Not really.
So, and again, I have a couple of pushbacks here. The first one to the latter point, or the former point rather, which is, again, there have always been consequences to behavior. People have always lost their jobs for things that they've said. The difference is now, in the 21st century, there's a movement to say, look, things that can get you fired aren't just things that harm certain groups of people, but things that may do harm to other groups of people. Now suddenly race is in the conversation. Trans folk are in the conversation. Women are in the conversation. Issues around ability status are in the conversation.
The word folk makes me uncomfortable. Word folk comes from...
Oh my God.
I hate...
That was cringy.
I hate this shit.
That was so cringy.
He really thought that he was getting something good in there, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I want to see his face after this.
All right, let's see how Marc Lamont recovers.
I'm sorry?
Nationalism. The word folk that you just used makes me uncomfortable.
Oh, the word
that
folk. I'm sorry.
Herder. Yeah, that comes from Herder, which is a German nationalist. He used it spelled with a V, but it's pronounced folk, right? And he had a strong German nationalist streak. And he his ideology about
this is like grounding the joke
led to some pretty bad things in the early 20th century. And I'm kind of uncomfortable with you using that word. So should your speech now be curtailed because I'm uncomfortable with the word folk?
Oh, yeah. My God.
In this context,
Jim, if you don't mind me calling you,
should.
Jim, if you don't mind me calling you Jim.
I do love, and this is the best response. Just bite the bullet and go, yeah, fuck. If you're uncomfortable with me saying Volk, yeah, I'll change what I'm doing. Best fucking response.
I would say I receive that. I own that. Mm-hmm. I deeply apologize for it. If there's a way that I can engage in a restorative act to make you feel better about it, I would happily do so.
I don't need a restorative act. I'm just telling you that you should know the history of the word that you're using.
He's still going.
I agree. I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying I should. And if there's something I can do to make sure that other people know it, I'm happy to do that as well. I think that is exactly what we should do when our words do harm.
Not folkish, ISH, but folkish. The German folk. Do you know where the ideology went?
We get your point.
Because he's fucking owned. His brain fucking broke. He didn't know what to fucking do.
He had all this planned out, expecting pushback.
Yeah. I mean, but that's the easiest response is just to just be like, yeah, of course, I'll fucking change what I'm saying.
Yeah, because it doesn't and this is. Listen, I know some of you out there are white, and so this might offend you a little bit, but that's the easiest fucking way to deal with white folk right there. They fucking come at you like, I don't like this. All right, man. Okay. I'm never gonna see you again. I don't give a shit what you feel. Sure, I'm sorry you feel bad right now, but I'm not gonna take that home with me. Go figure it out, man.
Yeah. I like that's the like it's you know what it is? It's like people like Lindsay are looking for like a reason to feel aggrieved. And so what they're saying is like they're trying to portray that there's these people out there that will just jump on you and yell and do all this stuff when it's like clear little slip ups like the thing that he's trying to like get with this folk thing usually get met with how Mark responded, which is just a chill like, hey, sorry that bothered you, I'll think about it and change how I behave, like cool. But like they think that there's just these mobs out there, like, or at least like that's the image they're trying to sell to people, that there's these mobs out there that'll like destroy them for even doing this. And it's like no one's out there doing that. The fact of the matter is the reason you're getting mobbed, James Lindsay, is like because you say racist shit all the time. It has nothing to do with this. It has to do with the fact that you're playing cover for racist shit. That you appear on things like ProgRU and like launder far right racist Christian bullshit. Like, even though you pretend to be an atheist. It's so frustrating. I say that only because I know he gets supported by the Christian far right to do this shit, even though he claims to be an atheist. For a fun fact. Here's a what is this book? Jimmy needs the pushback and it's just not coming. Yeah. As his friend Helen Brooks calls it, grievance studies. I mean, that's the thing, is they try to paint everyone else as the grievance study, but they're the ones who are so aggrieved. Like, chill out.
Right. So again, the example that you're getting, just so that we don't get too far down this rabbit hole, I'm saying, with what you're saying, I'm saying this is exactly what I would argue should happen. You should point something out. I should be able to respond to it. And even though you're doing it somewhat tongue in cheek, potentially, I'll presume that you're doing this in good faith. I would say I would happily change my speech and model it for other people. And that's the problem, is that somehow when the left does that toward the right or toward white people around race or toward men around gender, we often don't want to do that. And that's where it gets very, 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 very troublesome for me. But the second issue that I have here, and we can talk about it, I'm going to hold you guys over because I'd love to finish this conversation, is that some of the ways that you all are representing how social justice rhetoric is being used, I think is inaccurate. There's ways that you all are framing this that are almost caricatures of what people are actually saying in progressive circles. So I don't want to throw one out there and make people wait. So let me just pause here just so we can take a commercial break.
Okay.
And then you can come back and we can have the whole conversation. I just don't want to cut you off. I want to give you a full sentence. Everybody, stay with us. I have some.
Look at kudos to Marc Lamont Hill. And like he is good at his fucking job. Notice how he realized that like Peter was a little bit upset about that, and he found a way to like politely go, look, the only reason I'm doing this is because I don't want to cut you off mid-sentence. So we'll.
Yo, again, no fucking lie. This is I can see that skill. That it's just fucking just chef's kiss. Mwah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. But that's like he's
it's
also
tiptoeing over their white fragility.
I mean, that's what I was gonna say. That's the sad thing, is like Marc Lamont Hill is fucking full professor at Temple. You don't get that far with his background without learning how to tiptoe around white fragility. You just don't fucking do it. It is a skill you have to pick up.
Yeah. And he
made two separate appeals to him to like not interrupt there.
Yeah.
And I think the other one, I just want to let you have the full sentence, but I think the even bigger part was we just need to do the ad break, because there's no fucking way that they aren't like, oh yes, the ads must love
capitalism.
Respect, like just like tiptoeing around kind of all of it, but also like giving them that little like, ooh, capitalism, yum, we like this.
Tea time.
No, you think capitalist, right?
Or Kevin, I think it is. I'm white fragility is not just a Robin DiAngelo thing necessarily, even though she wrote a book called White Fragility. But And like I have problems with D'Angelo's book, mainly for the fact of her being a PR spokesman for companies who goes around teaching this shit when it's like kind of gross and kind of exploitative, you know? But I mean, if you want to see whether or not white fragility is in fact a thing or not, I mean, we're seeing it, right? I mean, these two are like the like. I guess if you had an encyclopedia or a dictionary definition, James Lindsay's face would appear in white fragility. I think that is a legitimate claim to his position.
Some great
Are they
people.
both doing that
I
thing
said
with their
people.
face?
Oh, the I don't know, because they're nervous.
Lip thing. Also, I love Marc Lamont Hill's
Hell yeah.
the whole thing right now
Yeah.
on the pause. It's so good.
I mean, I'm a big camera pointer. I've done it. I love it. Love it.
I just love the grin and the camera play. Like,
No,
so.
he knows. He's like, the funny thing is, like, I mean, there's the element of the white fragility thing that we were mentioning, but there's also, oops, I shut off my light here. There's also just the knowledge gap. Like, Mark clearly knows his shit on this subject, and they clearly fucking don't.
Yeah.
You know? And so there's an element of earned smugness, I think, in that smile, but I like it.
Yeah. Love it.
Here with me, and we're going to have a great conversation with these human beings.
I'm like,
Stay with us.
he called them human beings.
Yeah.
What a fucking lie that is.
Oh.
Now, welcome back to Black News Tonight. I've been having a wonderful conversation here around these questions of rhetoric, this question of language when it comes to social justice. And I have two guests here, Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay, who have been engaging me in a conversation about whether or not these are legitimate spaces to engage, or rather, what legitimate engagement looks like with questions of social justice language. So I want to keep the conversation going. Peter, you were going to say something. I wanted to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So when Jim said that and you gave your response, I would like to give the identical response that you gave to our sheet. So if there's something that's unfair or we've mischaracterized something, I'd invite people to tell us and to have that conversation with us. And we're completely willing to revise or revamp. In fact, we've said repeatedly that this is a first iteration. And if you go to the site, actually Jim's site, New Discourses, and you can call me Pete or Peter, either one. If you go to New Discourses, you can see each of those words are sourced within the social justice literature. So we didn't just invent this stuff.
Right.
We took the words as they were used from the social justice literature. And if we've made a mistake, then I'll fully apologize for that and revise accordingly.
I will say, like, I wonder if, like, Peter and James's thing as, like, a dynamic duo is for, like, him to seem somewhat rational and for James to just be a complete, utter fucking buffoon. I don't know, like, what that strategy is, but, like, but there's a weird thing of, like, James takes most of the questions and says complete nonsense, and then Peter is just like, yeah, if you criticize what we're doing, just write in, we'll figure it out. I mean, he's still a shithead, but I just don't know what the
Really, I don't know if it was the YouTube automatic subtitles or not, but I really thought that Marc Lamont Hill said Peter Benghazi.
Oh, well, I mean, he pronounced.
So I was just like, oh dang, he must. Okay.
His name is pronounced Boghossian.
Yeah, it was just. Yeah. It was just kind of like I saw that and it was just like, I wonder how bad of a time he had in 2012. Like,
if his name.
But that's not his last name, so.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I joke is because there's a Peter Boghossian in philosophy on top of him as Peter Boghossian that's more well known and more published.
There's a what, sorry?
There is another Peter Boghossian in philosophy who's more well known and more published than he is. And I remember the
Paul Boghossian.
Oh, it might be a Paul Boghossian.
Paul, not Peter.
Right. No, because now I remember what it was. I had to write
Saints.
a paper on Paul Boghossian, and but it was titled P. Boghossian, and I was like, "Is this the Peter atheist dude?" And then when I read it, I was like, "That's not Peter." Yeah, it was Paul.
Aren't Peter and Paul epistles or apostles or something?
I
Yeah,
wonder. You remember?
but they're also saying,
Remember there was the.
no, because Paul wasn't an apostle technically.
Remember there was the two Gordon Changs, and one of them was like the other Gordon Chang is the bane of my existence. I wonder if Paul Boghossian thinks
Shit,
that
yeah.
about Peter.
I hope so.
All right, so let's look at a couple of the things here. This is one of the things that I find interesting. So under systemic racism, you say when people progressives, I'm just going to use progressives if you don't mind. When you say progressives say or social justice people, excuse me, say differences are always due to systems, right? That's not the argument. When we say that there's systemic racism, the argument has never been that every single thing that happens in the world is due to systems. There's always been a relationship between structures or systems and agency, human action. And all of the research literature, all the philosophy, all the theory has been about trying to find a balance and trying to make sense of the relationship between those two things. We're not robots walking through the world. We have choices, we have options. No race theorist argues that we don't. And so the idea here that systemic racism is just some kind of institutional blame game, I think, becomes a kind of caricature of it. I'm going to say one more, and then
I'll let him finish in a second. I just wanted to respond quickly to something that Devin said in the chat, and also I guess I was going to fix my camera, but it fixed itself. Yeah. So Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. Peter Boghossian first, right? I've known about him for longer. He made his rounds in the atheist community almost back when like the Four Horsemen, quote unquote, were like big. And he wrote his own book in 2013, I guess, that was called A Manual for Creating Atheists. And it was like his contribution to the whole new atheism movement. So you had all these new atheist books coming out. Peter Boghossian wrote a book called A Manual for Creating Atheists. Excuse me. The ironic thing is like part of that book, and then he released a subsequent book that is co-authored with James Lindsay, I think, which is called How to Have Impossible Conversations. And the idea was sort of like the Socratic method in how to like convert religious people to atheists. But these are the types of people, and we're going to figure this soon, that are just terrible at having conversations, right? Yet they were writing manuals on like how to have conversations. James Lindsay also got his start in the atheist movement. I don't think the two of them like were like together until they met within like the atheist community. And part of that was because so like James had written a book that was about what atheists like how atheists deal with death and that, and did a round on a bunch of atheist podcasts. That's how I first heard about Lindsay, was him writing that book. And then from that they emerged out of the atheist community into this nonsense. Right around Gamergate and all, like there was this thing in the atheist community called Elevator Gate, which I think you might have remembered, which was I don't know if we talked about it last. We talked about it recently. It was basically Rebecca Watson, who was on Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, was on an elevator, and some guy came into the elevator with her and asked her to his room, and she kindly declined and then like left the elevator. And then later made some sort of video post about like, don't ask a woman alone in an elevator at night on a date. Like that's kind of weird and uncomfortable. And then the whole atheist community like exploded with like tons of like anti-feminists being like, we can't ask women on dates anymore. And then
fucking milady neckbeards coming out of the woodwork.
And yeah, that was like the big split. And then that's when these two started like making that sharp turn into the like anti-cancel culture bullshit. So Elevator Gate, like Watergate. Yeah, too many fucking gamer gates, all these fucking gates. But yeah, so they do come out of the atheist thing. But again, the weird thing is James Lindsay is currently supported, and the positions that like he went on PragerU. PragerU is like, he is a Jewish person, but like promotes like the abolishment of church-state separation. Like all these people are like super religious zealots, Christian nationalists that now are in bed with James Lindsay. So it's like if I was an atheist, you would never, and I am, you would never find me working with Christian nationalists. Yet he's more than willing to take their money to push this fucking bullshit that he's pushing on Marc Lamont's show. So I thought I would fill you in on the backstory there.
I want to give you two a chance to respond here. You said that critical race theory says that is the view that all disparities in group outcomes are due to racist systems, right? Again, no. I mean, one of the most enduring, if not the most enduring term from critical race theory has been intersectionality. And so when we look at people like Kimberly Crenshaw and others who talk about the intersections of race and gender and geography and ability status, I think it's wholly inaccurate to suggest that everything, even in critical race theory, is chalked up to race. How would you respond to those two criticisms?
I mean, the intersectionality one's actually very easy to respond to. Yeah, of course she's talking about.
I think this is the word salad we're going to get. So I wanted to prime you. We're going to listen to the whole thing. It might be incoherent.
Other intersecting systems of power, but all of these systems of power are said to work the same way. And you mentioned structural, so I'm very glad you did that, because structural refers to, in this case, one of two things: language, as in structuralism, as interpreted through postmodernism, which means that we are actually contingent products of our culture and times, which therefore means that we don't actually have agency, that because we are actually just socialized into the conditions that we're in, and we mistake that which we think is true when it's actually just manifestations of those systems of power. It's also can refer to the structures of society in a Marxian superstructure way, like Karl Marx, as put forth, say, by Herbert Marcuse in the 1960s, father of the New Left, who talked about the fact that everybody who doesn't have a critical awakened consciousness, in other words, everybody who's not a critical theorist, whether it's critical race, critical gender, critical queer, critical disability, critical fat, whatever you want to have it, is actually just being influenced in his thought through the heteronomous interests of corporate capitalism and consumerism and the various systems of power, including racism, sexism, et cetera, that manifest throughout society. So actually, we don't have agency under critical race theory or any of its philosophical antecedents.
How many people followed along?
Fucking correct at the end. What the fuck, Peter? Yeah, get him, James. Yeah, get him, Jimmy.
James Lindsay.
I couldn't follow any of that.
And this is again, kudos to Marc Lamont Hill, because he got more out of it than I initially on first listen. Like, I've heard this segment now a bunch of times that I can kind of see the move. Like, he definitely fucked up a whole bunch of shit and like mixed a whole bunch of stuff up, which confuses it. But watch how like Lamont Hill expertly like figures this shit out.
That's correct.
They
So
claim that you
I wish we had more time
The Peter, that's correct.
to unpack
your critical theorist, which is an incredible irony
Oh, he's
because
still
you actually
going.
have to sacrifice all of your agency to think otherwise, which is how it chills freedom of thought and freedom of speech, because you have to be critically conscious or else you have false consciousness and are therefore not acting out yourself. You have no actual agency.
Okay, so, and of course we're running out of time, but I'm going to respond just so the audience and the people who watch us on clips don't think that I don't have a response. First of all,
Sure.
your counter is predicated on the idea that there's a one-to-one relationship between critical race theory and critical theory as sort of produced from the Marxist tradition, from the Frankfurt School, etc., when in fact, critical race theory has certainly connections to any kind of critical intellectual discourse, but it's also connected to critical legal studies, which was not committed to sort of inheriting all of the kind of Gramscian and Marxian sort of ideas that you're talking about.
It was not
and
really
again,
Marxist at
even
all.
the type of Marxism you're talking about is a very narrow, thin, sort of crude Marxism, or even what we call vulgar Marxism, which alleges a relationship between economic base and cultural superstructure that is one-to-one, when in fact, what most Marxists have argued, and what certainly most Marxists post the mid part of the 20th century have argued, is that it's a much more complicated dynamic than even Gramsci himself argues at in the Prison Notebooks about this idea of hegemony and how it happens along a compromise equilibrium, whereby some people, or whereby on the one hand we absolutely are hostage to the economic conditions around us, but on the other hand, structures and states and institutions also appeal to our own desires and our own interests and our own needs. It's a much more dynamic and complicated relationship than you're talking about. And as far as sort of structures, again, you're making a connection between structures in terms of institutional structures that I was talking about and the particular type of structures that, say, a Saussure would be talking about in terms of structuralism. That's not actually what I was talking about. And that's not what most people are talking about when they talk about systems and structures. Again, that's a very tight correlation you draw. And if we were to accept that correlation, then sure. But it's not only that we're not accepting it, it's actually not what we're talking about. And postmodernism, again, plays upon a range of things. I'm sorry?
I said you know a lot about this, actually.
Yeah.
Good face.
I didn't realize he was so cool.
Fucking face.
Oh my god!
When you realize you're talking to someone, like, oh my god, I said in the chat, but James Lindsay is the poster child for just like fucking mediocre white men thinking they know a lot about shit. Like, again, Mark's a fucking professor at Temple. What the fuck did you think was gonna happen, James? He's just not gonna know
Be a
anything.
professor in.
Oh, I can't remember. Some fucking amazing shit. He's just like he's Superman. You know, you don't
Is
question
he
it.
single?
Yeah, he's
I-
single.
I don't think so.
I will.
I don't think he's single.
I will say that you could see the skill too in just like in terms of like. I mean, like, not to put myself on the same level, but just like even like I've had to deal with students in the class that clearly don't get the material, and yet you try to take what they say, but then like find a new way to frame it and parse it out. You know what I mean? Like the academic skills are clearly showing in that response. In a way of communicating in it, like I mean, he's using. I think he'll even admit that he didn't expect it to get to this like high level academic sort of like language, but there's a sense in which how he put it was definitely a lot more clear and understandable than whatever the fuck James Lindsay was doing, you know. But I yeah, like I find this all this like weird stuff about structures. I mean, the funny thing is, I did my own. Again, I'm going to use the word master. Yeah, my own master's thesis was on issues having to do with agency and free will and stuff like this. And like that had the funny thing is my argument in that paper was that we don't have free will and that agency is kind of a myth, often having to do with like environmental things. But a lot of the people that I was not directly arguing with, but like I was coming into conflict with other critical theorists and scholars, including those in the feminist movement that like relied on some sort of like notion of autonomy. And so like I wrestled with those subjects in my thesis. You know, and so it's like funny for them to stand here and try to argue that those theorists in the critical tradition believe that there's like these structures in place that like shape who we are such that there's no room for agency, which is not at all what those theorists think, you know? Nah, bro. Quantum consciousness is what makes the free will. Oh, yeah. No, I actually argued against the quantum people too in a small section of my paper. Oh man, I've been missing the agency talk. Oh, we just started the agency talk, but like they argue that like because of what they claim is that structural racism argues that no one can have agency because we're all shaped by these structures. And like there's people that are on varying degrees of this scale, right? Like you can be someone who thinks that everything imposes on us in some way such that there's no room for agency ever, or you can be like they more or less have an impact. I guess like for me when it comes to like these structures, like structural racism in the sense, it clearly has an effect, but it's not the only thing that has an effect, right? And I guess in that sense, other people's behaviors and activities and even like other intersecting variables also have an effect. So it's not like saying structural racism that therefore those structures are the only things that like impact us in reality or whatever. But like the question of agency is a separate fucking question. I mean, it's like it's funny because like most of the people in the critical studies field are mostly like postmodernists too, and so the approach, like to argue that there are no agency, usually comes from more of a modernist tradition of like determinism and material reality, uh, sort of like dictates like what comes after, right? And I don't recall reading any of the critical studies people in that light, you know. There was nothing I love talking about more than how the parochial concept of free will is demonstrably wrong, and that the distinctions between agency and coercion are complex, not easy to separate. Yeah. There's enough steps in the dominoes between systems impact and my environments, and how my environment sends my body signals, how my body does behavioral genetics, or those, and then I make choices. That's a lot of coins to flip. Sure. But I mean, a coin flip is something you completely do not have agency over. There was another comment I wanted to make. Oh, it gets back to the CRT stuff too. Yeah, I find it amusing because I saw people protesting critical race theory in like some of these jurisdictions that are like trying to create laws now to ban the practice in various cities. And one of the protesters, well, a bunch of the protesters, I'm guessing they were paid all to have the same like signs or whatever, or somebody made all the signs to then hand out to all the protesters, and it said like stop indoctrination through education or whatever. And part of me laughed where I'm like, what is education but indoctrination, you know? Is it, I mean, teaching someone the facts or reality is just like, what's the difference between education and indoctrination? They're the same thing, unless you want to add some like moral element to it and say that indoctrination involves more like coercion. But then it's like having a public school system teach you something coercion, and in what way, you know? Like, how is it any more coercive than teaching people fucking maths, you know? It's just I hate this stuff. Mainly because like I don't know if it just comes from the fact that I studied this in school, but like I feel like whenever people are talking about agency and all this stuff, it's like no. I mean, I have this argument all the time, even with like moral realists, which I've brought this up several times on the show, where it's like at the end of the day, even though I don't believe we have that agency is a real thing, I'm still gonna think you're a shitty person for doing something shitty. Like I think the question of agency is completely irrelevant. But that part is a discussion for another day. Unless
So before we press play, Marc Lamont Hill is a professor of media studies and urban education at Temple. Also, he wrote a book with Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's like a long-standing political prisoner in the U.S. Imprisoned after like he was involved with MOVE in Philadelphia after
the bombing,
and that was like the MOVE bombing was. I think he was arrested like right before that happened. Maybe I'm blanking on timelines. I read his autobiography a little while ago, but also like was big in the Black Panthers when they were still around, and like just really cool dude. I had no idea Marc Lamont Hill was so fucking cool.
Yeah.
I thought he was just cool on Palestine, you know? I thought he was just like a left lib, but like
he was on CNN,
really
right?
fucking cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know? So like he hears CNN, you're just like, okay, you're you know, you're all right, but like you're probably not great. Nah, he's really good. Like
yeah.
Hell yeah.
No, I'm bringing up MOVE. Like I'm always not too surprised, but it's sad that I think more people know about things like Waco than they do about MOVE, which again gets to who was the victim in each case. Right? Although I'm still on the fence to what extent Waco actual victims, but there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding that are funk. But again, not the place.
That you know a very large amount about this, very much detail. And so I have a question for you then. Do you accept, for example, in Critical Race Theory and Introduction, which is a pretty standard textbook in the subject, I think you would agree, Do you accept where they have an entire section and part of a chapter dedicated to the idea that there is structural determinism along the structure of racism? Do you believe in structural determinism, which is a core assumption of critical race theory? That the structures themselves determine outcomes based on race?
Structures shape outcomes. They overdetermine outcomes. They inform outcomes, but they do not predetermine outcomes in such a way that we have no power, that we have no ability to change systems or structures. If that were the case, then we would have a very predictable, what we would sort of a pathway towards some ultimate telos, some ultimate end in sight. In other words, I believe that human beings have the capacity to change and shift and push back and reimagine and reshape. And that's what I think your analysis doesn't do. We got way more academic than I wanted to for this audience. But unfortunately, if I don't respond in that way, then the audience will assume that I can't. So I'm going to bring you all back so we can have a much longer conversation about this. And maybe we can do it in some other spaces where we can really dig down and drill down into this a lot. Peter and James, thank you so much for joining me. Stay with us, everybody. We got much more Black News Tonight coming up right after this.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Now, I mean, I have philosophical quibbles with what Marc Lamont Hill said, but not worth bringing up here. I mean, otherwise, I think what he said there is like most people would get on board with, which is like obviously. I mean, even in the realm of predictability, I don't think that we'll have enough knowledge of everything to be able to predict based on the structures and material reality today how everything is going to play out, especially in terms of indeterminacy that actually might exist in our world or whatnot, right? But like, yeah, like I mean, like I'm obviously in favor of the idea of like we affect things, you know, actually go out and do things. I just think that our motivation and other things are again motivated by our material conditions, which constrain our motivation in these circumstances, right? Which is why all the rich people are not yelling at John Tory about the police removing the homeless people, because the material conditions play a role in their moral responses to these. Anyways, he invites them back, right? Isn't that nice? Total rad dude. Invites them back. Cool. How well do we think that's going? Let's take
Oh, yeah, I'll tab real quick. I saw this.
I'm gonna pull up the tweets in a second, but
Jesus Christ.
How did this go today?
I think James is very happy with how that turned out, and Peter is also quite pleased.
Hill is taking a good existential angle here. The world is a big interconnecting web of forces beyond our control. Yeah, no, I can agree with that. They don't puppeteer us directly. We respond to whatever we are presented in the context. Yep. Well, that's... No,
or
I
you
mean,
get
I don't have too much philosophical nuance. Yeah, go. Sorry about that.
Before you get too far down, there's a retweet of him for John McWhorter.
Oh no. Okay.
Apparently, apparently John McWhorter said he's not going to go on Marc Lamont Hill's show because he's on a podcast moratorium. And in real life, he's a linguist. And he likes talking. He just needs to get some actual career work done. Now, someone might point out, rightfully, that every single fucking time that someone's invited John McWhorter on to talk about the shit that he spews online, he consistently turns it down. It's weird. It's weird how that happens, John. It's weird how you always have to do real work once someone who actually knows what the fuck they're talking about invites you on.
Yep.
Real weird, John. Funny.
Sorry, who is that dude? I don't know.
Oh,
John McWhorter is a linguist at Columbia, and he loves to jump into the online debates about how wokeism is such a problem, despite being a linguist, parroting the most ridiculous fucking talking points.
Well, didn't him and Glenn Lowry talk about IQ and race and shit like that? Like, yeah. John McWhorter, like, what are you doing?
He's a fucking...
Here's
I mean, like...
McWhorter for those who don't.
John McWhorter, and I can say this as someone who's not at Columbia, is a fucking moron. Like, I don't know what it is about you humanities people, but you guys get too fucking big in your goddamn britches sometimes. Fucking linguists and fucking philosophers coming in being like, I'm a linguist and I studied all these complex fucking rules that we made up Therefore, I know about statistics, and you don't.
Well, maybe
you don't know
it
anything.
wouldn't be this way if you over there in your STEM fields didn't sap all the resources.
We took all the money. There's nothing left. You fucking educate yourself. God damn it. You fucking come into our circles. You're like, I know all about math and statistics and how to do a study. And then I actually fucking committed research fraud.
Listen, I realize that like you come into conflict with it in a more like visceral sense, and I can appreciate that. But my position has always been that there's assholes on both sides of this divide, and that like I hope I am a representative of someone who's like, no, there's common ground here. Let's talk and listen and not step over each other's like toes. You know what I mean? Like that's.
I appreciate that. I feel like we get along well, and I hope that I come across as a representative of someone who's never going to give you guys more funding, and instead just going to fucking absorb you into the STEM field until you all shut the fuck up and die.
Listen, what you should say is you want more people like me, or people who think like me in the arts, so that you don't get people like John McWhorter do. Well, I mean, they'll still exist, but we'll at least be yelling at them with you. You know. Anyways, but Marc Lamont Hill.
Is Marc Lamont Hill Muslim as well?
I'm not sure.
It's not on his wiki, and he has that as his Twitter header, and it's just kind of like, huh.
Ah, yes. Maybe.
I think that's James Baldwin there, so it's kind of just like, are we? Yeah. I know he's met with Farrakhan because that was on his Wikipedia, but like, I don't know. It's the U.S. Like, I feel like everybody needs the Farrakhan.
So here's let's see if this started somewhere else. James Lindsay tweets something here. So it says, remember when Kimberly Crenshaw went on Joy-Ann Reid's show the other day and said she would know if critical race theory was being taught in K-12 schools and that it isn't? She lied. This book is being used in some schools. She wrote the foreword. Okay? And Mark goes, there are so many things inaccurate and problematic with this attempt at a gotcha. We should convene a public forum and have a detailed substantive discussion that includes the leading voices in the conversation about this. So again, extending a hand to James Lindsay going, we can talk about this. And James Lindsay's response to this? Shut up, commie.
Brilliant. Fucking brilliant.
And then Mark
Got
goes,
him.
I invited this man to a public forum for civil debate. This was his response. Please understand that many of these folk don't operate in good faith. I feel like adding folk here is a dig. Now that we've watched that segment, I feel like folk is a dig. Also, they get real tough on Twitter. None of this hot air was present when we actually debated. Yeah. So, yeah, I think he got owned by Marc Lamont Hill and is now
he's
ducking. He's Cold Feet Crowder.
Jesus.
I mean, that's the thing. People are so soft with like little pushback, and they just crumple.
Look at that top reply tweet as well.
He should read his own book. Yeah, how to have a conversation. I responded to that. I said he's a grifter. He isn't in the business of actually having a conversation.
Isn't this the man you owned on television last week?
What was that? Sorry. Oh, is this
Where?
the
Next
on
week.
television last week who acquiesced that you, a university professor, actually knew what you were talking about? Restructure? LOL. Where was this energy then? He saves the jabs for the quote tweets? Yeah.
Oh my god. Who are these fucking people?
Yeah. You know what? Cancel culture has not gone far enough. Cancel James Lindsay. I want James Lindsay to lose his career completely. Go away, James Lindsay.
No more math.
No more math. No.
Hey, wait, no, hold on. Wait. Not what we're doing.
Hello, my rebels. Hello, my rebels. I'm a good boy. I'm a weirdo.